Alright, we're shifting focus to comic book movies now, starting with Man of Steel, the first film in the DC Extended Universe Zack Snyder trilogy. Or whatever that trilogy is called, I don't know. Anyway, if you've seen the music choice video I made that swapped John Williams' classic Superman theme into Zack Snyder's Justice League, then you already know how much I enjoyed seeing Henry Cavill as the Man of Steel. And even though I liked Michael Shannon's rendition of General Zod,
I will find him!
I didn't care for how that great villain in this film was taken apart early on, when Zod confronted Jor-El for possession of the Codex. Let's take a look at that. Not only is it unrealistic, even on a fictional planet, for a military general in his prime to be totally outclassed like this, but it shows that Zod really isn't a terribly big threat. And one thing we don't want to do is show a villain not being a terribly big threat, especially this early in the film. I mean, if Zod is getting his butt whooped by Jor-El early in the film, then it's not much of a stretch to imagine that his son, Kal-El, will be whooping on Zod later in the film. That's not the precedent that we want to set here. So let's continue.
Laura, listen to me! The Codex is Krypton's future! Abort the launch!
And now we see Zod from a position of weakness appearing to beg Jor-El's wife, Lara, to abort the launch. I say beg because Zod isn't in any position to make demands here, and that just knocks him down even more. How are we supposed to believe Zod is a threat later in the film if he's not even a threat early in the film? Let's see what we can do with this. Jor-El can put up a small resistance, but in hand-to-hand combat, except for getting hit with the butt of Jor-El's rifle, Zod simply dominates Jor-El. Now we see Zod as strong, as someone capable of gathering followers for a coup. And while we did see Jor-El beating up Zod's followers earlier, this actually helps to elevate Zod once we see that Jor-El is simply no match for him, since we see why Zod is the leader and why the followers are the followers.
Laura, listen to me! The Codex is Krypton's future!
By removing the clips of Jor-El beating on Zod, we preserve Zod as a viable threat to Clark later in the movie. And I know that I keep saying in these videos that for the hero to appear strong, the villain must appear strong. But as a storyteller, that point cannot be stressed enough. The villain must represent a challenge for the hero to overcome. Okay, we'll now move on to a bit later in the film when Kal-El lands on Earth. To start, as Krypton explodes, Lara tells Kal to make his world a better place. Kal's ship speeds through space, and Kal eventually lands on Earth. From there, we're moved all the way up to present day, when Clark rescues workers from an oil rig explosion. And then, as he floats in the water, we see a flashback of young Clark in school freaking out as his sensory perception becomes ultra-sensitive. We then flash forward to present day to witness Clark stealing someone's clothes, after which we see Clark noticing a school bus and flashing back to the time when young Clark rescued a bus full of his fellow students. We also hear Clark's Earth father, Jonathan Kent, reminding Clark to keep his powers a secret and advising him to search for the reason why he was sent to Earth. We're then flash forwarded again to present day to see Clark eavesdropping on some secret military information about the location of a strange object. Clark is then mocked by what appears to be a drunk guy, and in retaliation, Clark messes up the guy's truck, which is the second thing we've seen Clark do in the present day that was out of character for him. Not to mention, Clark getting revenge on the drunk guy in such an extraordinary way is yet another public display of his powers, which means that in the present day, we've seen Clark disobey his Earth Father's wishes twice. Which also means that Clark doesn't seem to listen to the advice of his Earth Father, except when his Earth Father is about to get swept up in a tornado. Then he listens. Now, I say that this section of the film is jumbled because there's simply no need to show Clark's powers when they developed in his youth, especially since it's a quick flashback that lacks context. We also don't really need the oil rig rescue scene, especially since Clark performs another rescue in which he saves a school bus full of his classmates. So let's remove the oil rig and lead with the school bus, since that leads into the scene in which Clark's Earth Father talks to Clark about why he shouldn't use his powers. And yes, that means we're going to cut out younger Clark getting his X-ray vision, super hearing, and heat vision powers, because we're simply shown what Clark can do and are expected to accept that he can do it. So why can't we be shown those powers and accept those powers later when Clark performs them as needed? I mean, the audience for a Superman film already knows who Superman is and what his powers are anyway. Okay, so in our alternate version of the film, we start with Krypton exploding as Lara tells Kal to make his world a better place. We then take the forward motion of Kal's ship descending to Earth and cut that to the forward motion of the school bus, on which a young Clark is also a passenger. The bus accident occurs, Clark rescues everyone on the bus, and we then hear Clark's Earth Father, Jonathan Kent, reminding Clark to keep his powers a secret. He also advises Clark to search for the reason why he was sent to Earth. Skipping ahead in time from young Clark to present-day adult Clark, we see Clark overhearing some secret military information about the location of a strange object. Clark is then mocked by what appears to be a drunk guy. Rather than having Clark retaliate, though, after he leaves the restaurant,
don't forget your tip. Steve Rag.
Come on, Kent.
what we instead lead into is a flashback of a time when teenage Clark was bullied and prodded by the bully to fight back. The bully walks away when he sees Clark's Earth Father, and after Clark tells his Earth Father of how bad he wanted to hit the bully, Clark's Earth Father tells Clark,
You just have to decide what kind of man you want to grow up to be, Clark, because whoever that man is, good character or bad, he's going to change the world.
This scene fits in well when it comes just after Clark's Earth Father talks to him about the importance of keeping his powers a secret. This is also the perfect scene to follow the scene of the drunk guy pushing Clark around and acting as if he's the better man. This shows us why Clark didn't hit the drunk guy or retaliate in any way. It shows us why Clark allows the drunk guy to humiliate him, even while Clark could wreck that guy with absolute ease. Right here is where we show Clark's character, why Clark can be responsible with the powers he has. Because Clark not only built a solid moral foundation, thanks in part to his Earth Father's wisdom, but also practices self-restraint, which is something we don't see when he's stealing clothes or destroying vehicles as a form of revenge. Instead, we see Clark following his Earth Father's teachings rather than simply ignoring them whenever he feels like it, even when following the path of self-restraint is super difficult. So, now we have a certain flow to the storytelling. One thing leads to another. We're now not seeing the aftermath of an oil rig explosion and left wondering why Clark is flashing back to his childhood while floating in the water. We're not just inserting a flashback of the time that younger Clark experienced X-ray vision for the first time, then showing Clark stealing some clothes. We're not just inserting a flashback of a bus rescue because Clark happens to see a school bus. The progression of events now makes sense. Okay, the final thing we'll talk about in this video is the way that Superman's rescue of Lois Lane is cut with Zod's attack on Clark's mother. The first event begins with Superman saving Lois. Let's start there. So we have Superman in action saving Lois, and this action is interrupted by a dog barking. Why? We'll keep watching and see if we can find out. Alright, Martha sees Zod's ship landing right outside her door. Then, with an explosion replacing Zod's ship in the frame, we're taken back to Superman and Lois, slowing to a gentle landing. Why are we cutting away from one landing to watch another landing? Is this supposed to be symbolic? If so, the symbolism simply isn't landing. It seems like the same error that occurred earlier in the film when we're shown a school bus, and that's supposed to relate to the next scene of a flashback of Clark on a school bus. Here, we have Zod's ship landing, and that's supposed to relate to Superman's landing, like Zod is landing to destroy life while Superman is landing to preserve life. I guess you can cut between those clips as a contrast, but it really doesn't work for me, brother. And we're fast forwarding through this clip a bit to ask the question, what is it that alerts Superman that his mother is in danger? Superman flies away from Lois before Zod says a word to his mother, so apparently it's the landing of the ship that Superman hears, alerting him to the danger. We do witness Zod threatening Superman's mother.
The craft he arrived in, where is it?
Go to hell.
But that comes only after Superman has already left Lois. So let's find out why that's not a strong order and move these cuts a bit and see what happens.
You'll be safe here.
Okay, the first change we make is to complete that rescue and touch back down on Earth. Remember, we just spent some time in space, so let's put our feet on the ground first before we do anything else. Also, there's no reason why we should cut away from Superman's rescue of Lois. It's like an attempt to create suspense where it really isn't needed.
About you, but they did something to me. They looked inside my mind.
It's okay, Lois. They did the same thing to me.
Following the rescue, we allow the scene to quiet down as Superman and Lois talk. So when the dog barks, it's less like one sound serving as an awkward interruption of other loud sounds and more like a real attention getter. Alright, we'll fast forward a bit again so we can show what exactly gets Superman's attention. And in this alternate cut, it's not a landing ship that alerts Superman.
The Codex is not here.
Also, by moving these cuts, we're creating suspense where it matters. Rather than trying to create suspense with whether Superman can safely land with Lois, because we know that he can, we're now creating suspense with whether Martha can deal with Zod's threats on her physical well-being. In the original scene, Superman senses Zod's ship landing and takes off before we even see Zod. So when Zod is threatening Martha, we already know that Superman is on his way, deflating any suspense that could be created here. In the alternate scene, we build that suspense by showing Zod threatening Martha while Superman is oblivious to the danger presented to his mother. This is now a solid setup, and we won't allow much time to pass before we pay it off. Once Superman hears that his mother is in trouble, he takes off. We see Zod moving in, and Superman intercepts him. We had the setup, and we get our payoff. And that's all for now.